Hey, here we are. All right. Let's see if I can't get everything going here. And welcome again to my podcast. Hey, it is great to be here. Today we're going to talk about a little bit about one of my recent, I don't know if it's an obsession, but one of my interests here in the Upper Valley that I discovered quite by accident. It is the Crown Point Road. And the Crown Point Road is a road, well, if I start talking about it now, then I won't have anything to read about. So I fell upon the Crown Point Road quite by accident. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I did notice on my journeys through the Springfield and Perkinsville and Weathersfield, Vermont areas that there were these stone markings on the sides of the roads, some on main roads, some on back roads, and they all said Crown Point Road, and they had a year, 17 something on them. I can't remember off the top of my head. And I was like, what are these all about? And so, of course, I went on DuckDuckGo and looked it up with Crown Point Road markers, and it gave me this all kinds of information. And lo and behold, now I am a member of the Crown Point Road Association. I've paid my dues. I've got, for those of you watching, they sent me, well, I ordered, they didn't just send it, but I ordered two books. One's called Reverend Samuel McClintock's Journal from 1760. And it talks about, well, it's a journal, and so it talks about things in his life during that time on the Crown Point Road. And then the 2011 edition, which is apparently the most recent edition of the historical markers of the Crown Point Road. So yeah, if you're watching on the video, this is them. And I carry them with me in my car so that I can try to read them, or with the idea of reading them on downtime. So yeah, this is just ASMR of me putting them back in the folder. All right, so let's talk about the Crown Point Road. The Crown Point Road is a historically significant military road built in 1759 to 1760. So keep in mind, it only took a year to do this before there was any mechanized equipment whatsoever, by British Army and colonial militia forces. It was Vermont's first major interstate highway and played a crucial role in the French and Indian War and the American Revolution, as well as the subsequent settlement of Vermont. So it's an interstate highway because it starts in New Hampshire and it goes across to Crown Point, New York. So it goes right across the waste of Vermont. Pretty serious terrain. Not a lot of flat land along the way. So, historical significance. The French and Indian War. General Jeffrey Amherst ordered the construction of the road after capturing Fort Ticonderoga and Fort Crown Point from the French. Its primary purpose was to create a direct supply route for troops and provisions from Fort Number 4 in present-day Charlestown, New Hampshire, to Fort Crown Point in New York on Lake Champlain, thus facilitating British campaigns into Canada. So people would travel upriver from, well, up the Connecticut River from Long Island Sound, or in Massachusetts or Connecticut, and they would travel up river to Fort Number 4, which was right on the banks of the Connecticut River. And then they would traverse the state of Vermont to bring supplies and personnel over to Crown Point. During the American Revolution, colonial militias, familiar with the road from the previous war, utilized it for their own advantage, moving troops and supplies to support the American position at Ticonderoga and contributing to the British defeat. And during the settlement of Vermont, after the French and Indian War, the Crown Point Road became a vital conduit for a large influx of settlers into the New Hampshire Grants, which is what Vermont was known as then. It opened up vast areas of the state for homesteads and towns, greatly influencing Vermont's early development. The route. The road stretched approximately 77.5 to 90 miles through the wilderness. I don't know why there's a big discrepancy there, but I think it just might be because it's lost to time. And so if you go this way, it would be this mileage. If you turn and go this way, it would be this mileage. I think has a lot to do with it. It began at Fort Number 4 in Charlestown, New Hampshire, on the east side of the Connecticut River. It then crossed the Connecticut River near the mouth of Beaver Brook into Vermont. In Vermont, it generally followed a north by northwest route, roughly paralleling the Black River and its southern extent, and the Otter Creek in its northern. As a little side note, Otter Creek has, there's a small brewery called Otter Creek Brewing, and they make a pretty good, what used to be a microbrew. I don't know if it's really called that anymore, but back in the day, we called it a microbrew. It passed through or near present-day towns such as Springfield, Wethersfield, Cavendish, Plymouth, Ludlow. I didn't know about Ludlow. Shrewsbury, Sudbury, Whiting, Shoreham, and Bridport. Near northern Sudbury, a spur of the road headed west towards Fort Ticonderoga, passing through present-day Orwell, while the main road continued northwest to Lake Champlain, opposite Fort Crown Point in New York. The route often coincided with or paralleled older Native American trails. Now that makes perfect sense, right? And I'm sure that it also followed game trails, deer paths, whatever you want to call them. Because if you were to take a walk in the woods now in Vermont, off trail, if you were off of a hiking trail and just walking through the woods, you would find deer paths or deer trails and other things making trails through the woods all the time, because they usually follow the path of least resistant to conserve energy. So I make the assumption that the people who made this road would have tried to do the same, right? Construction and legacy. I've just noticed that I'm not really looking at my camera much. The whole camera the whole time was pointed at the top of my head. So let's try to do a little better. So construction and legacy. Early work on the road involved clearing trees and stumps, building bridges over streams, and laying corduroy sections, logs laid side by side, across swampy terrain. We don't call it swampy terrain anymore. Now we call it wetlands, even though it's really just swampy terrain. But if you're unfamiliar with the term swampy, it means wetlands. Captain John Stark, commanding Rogers Rangers, was involved in its initial cutting and marking. I might do a thing on John Stark and Rogers Rangers, because those are pretty significant historically in the early wars of the country, and there's also some towns in Vermont named after Captain Stark. While parts of the original road have been paved over or have disappeared into the forest, some sections remain visible in their largely original condition. Those I've yet to find. I haven't gone out in the woods to hike and try to find any, but I have seen several roads in the areas of Springfield and Wethersfield that are called Crown Point Road. And in Springfield, it's kind of almost north Springfield, Wethersfield, there is a golf course called Crown Point Country Club. And when I first came across it, I had no idea why it was called Crown Point Country Club. It made absolutely no sense to me. And now that I've kind of embarked on this little bit of interest, it's clear why, because the road went right through where the property is. There's a marker at the clubhouse, and then there are markers, along the way as well. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, efforts were made to mark and commemorate the route with granite markers placed by organizations like the Daughters of the American Revolution. Some communities still have portions of the road named Crown Point Road or Old Crown Point Road. The Crown Point Road Association is dedicated to researching and preserving the history of this important pathway, often leading outings along its route. And I think that's pretty cool. I think at some point in my I think at some point I am going to want to take a walk through the woods and see if I can get from point to point. I think it's fascinating. I think this kind of thing is fascinating, that history like this is right under our feet. We don't, without us even knowing. Another example is right now I'm sitting at a parking lot in the town of Lebanon, New Hampshire, and the parking lot is for a trail system, and one of the features coming right out of the parking lot and running off to the side is Old Kings Highway is the name of the road and the trail, and it used to be a road to get from one part of town to the other. And there are a lot of towns in Vermont for sure, and New Hampshire apparently, that have Old Kings Highway or Kings Highway as some of their roads. And I'm running with the assumption that during the day, when those were in full use as regular roads, that they were the better maintained roads, and that you would find the stagecoaches or carriages or carts going along them. And I can only imagine these things to be true. I haven't done any research, but I think it's just kind of fascinating. I had the opportunity many years ago to drive out west, and we drove from Burlington, Vermont out to Sacramento, California, and there were spots along the way out west where you could see through the fields old wagon ruts going off into the distance, fairly close to the highway, and old towns or buildings and groupings of buildings that had just been lost to time. And I just find that kind of interesting, that all those things are still happening around us, or had happened around in the same areas that we're living our modern lives. And I tend to find more interest in that kind of thing than I do in the other direction, of saying, well, I live in the house that I live in now with my family, and 150 years from now, what's that portion of land going to look like? Is it going to be lost to time? Is my house going to eventually cave in on itself and just be an old cellar hole, and have weeds growing out of it, or trees and things like that, and we're living differently 150 years from now than we are today? And sure, I mean, I can get caught up in that, in the what ifs, but I prefer to look back and say, wow, this is all happening right here. In an upcoming episode, I'm going to be talking about how the landscape of Vermont is a lot different now than it was back in that time. It has a lot to do with sheep and wool, but I won't get into it too much, but come back and listen again then. So that's what I have today, is my little story about the Crown Point Road. I'm going to post some pictures. I'm going to try to figure out how to post pictures along with these podcast episodes of markers that I've taken pictures of, that I've come across, and we'll go from there. So if you have any other questions or want to know more, feel free to look up the Crown Point, what do they call themselves? I'm sorry. The Crown Point Road Association online. A lot of history and information there, or drop me a note and I'll see if I can find out some things for you. Again, thank you very much for being here. I appreciate your time, and I hope this was worth your 14 plus minutes. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.